Hiker vanished in Joshua Tree in 2010, 8 years later. They found this. Jake Morrison adjusted his telephoto lens, waiting for the perfect light to hit the twisted branches of an ancient Joshua tree. The landscape photographer had been documenting the Mojave Desert for 3 years, but Joshua Tree National Park still held secrets he hadn't captured. It was March 15, 2018, and the morning sun cast sharp shadows across the rocky terrain near Jumbo Rocks. He climbed carefully over the granite boulders, searching for an elevated position. His boot slipped on loose gravel, and he reached out to steady himself against a crevice in the rock face. His fingers touched something that wasn't stone. Morrison pulled out his phone and activated the flashlight. Wedged deep in the crack was a piece of faded blue fabric. He took several photos before carefully extracting it with a stick. The material was synthetic, possibly from a hiking jacket or backpack. "That's weird," he muttered, examining the fabric. It showed significant weathering and fading that suggested years of exposure. Below the fabric, something metallic glinted. Morrison used the stick to probe deeper and extracted a tarnished metal water bottle. The stainless steel surface was scratched and dented, with remnants of stickers that had mostly peeled away. One partial sticker remained readable: UC Berkeley. Morrison documented everything with his camera before continuing his search. 10 feet away, partially buried under accumulated sand and debris, he spotted something else: a hiking boot, weathered and cracked, with the sole separating from the upper. Inside the boot, protected from the elements, was a laminated emergency contact card. The card was legible despite some water damage. It read, "David Chen, age 29, emergency contact, Rebecca Chen, sister, 510-555-0847. Morrison's pulse quickened. He had heard about missing hikers in the park, but this seemed like it could be evidence from an old case. He photographed the contact card from multiple angles, then carefully wrapped it in a clean cloth from his camera bag. The area around the discovery site showed no obvious signs of remains, but Morrison knew this could be significant evidence in a missing person case. He marked the GPS coordinates on his phone: 34,0194° N, 116,1069° W. Instead of continuing his photography session, Morrison hiked back to his vehicle and drove directly to the Joshua Tree National Park Visitor Center. The park ranger on duty, a middle-aged woman named Sandra Martinez, listened carefully as he described his discovery. "I need to contact the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department," Martinez said, after examining Morrison's photos. "This could be related to an old missing person case." "How old are we talking?" Morrison asked. Martinez consulted her computer. "We've had several missing hiker cases over the years, but based on that UC Berkeley sticker and the emergency contact format, this could be from the David Chen case in 2010. 8 years ago? David Chen was reported missing in October 2010. He was a graduate student from UC Berkeley who came here for a solo hiking trip. His car was found at the Skull Rock parking area, but despite extensive searches, no trace of him was ever found." Martinez called the sheriff's department while Morrison waited. Within 20 minutes, Detective Maria Rodriguez arrived at the visitor center. Rodriguez was a 15-year veteran of the department who had worked dozens of missing person cases in the vast desert areas of San Bernardino County. "Mr. Morrison, I need you to walk me through exactly what you found and how you found it," Rodriguez said, setting up a digital recorder. Morrison recounted the discovery in detail, showing Rodriguez the photographs he had taken. Rodriguez examined each image carefully, taking notes. "The GPS coordinates you recorded are about 2 miles from where David Chen's car was found," Rodriguez said. "That's within the search area we covered in 2010, but these rock formations create a lot of hidden spaces." "So you think this could be from the Chen case?" Morrison asked. "The timeline fits, and the UC Berkeley connection is compelling. I'm going to need you to guide me back to the exact location." Rodriguez called for additional personnel and evidence collection equipment. Within an hour, a small team had assembled at the visitor center. Rodriguez, crime scene technician Paul Hughes, and search and rescue coordinator Tom Bradley. The group hiked to Morrison's discovery site, where Hughes began a methodical documentation and collection process. Using metal detectors and careful excavation techniques, the team expanded their search of the immediate area. Hughes discovered additional items: a corroded compass, fragments of what appeared to be a trail map, and several pieces of deteriorated nylon fabric. Most significantly, 20 yards from the original discovery site, partially concealed under a fallen Joshua tree branch, they found a damaged digital camera. "This is a Canon EOS model from around 2009 or 2010, Hughes said, carefully bagging the camera. "If the memory card survived, we might have photos from right before whatever happened." Rodriguez photographed the scene from multiple angles, while Bradley used his GPS unit to create precise location records. The discovery site was in a natural depression, surrounded by large granite outcroppings, an area that would be difficult to spot from most hiking trails. "This location makes sense," Bradley explained. "If someone was injured or disoriented, they might seek shelter in this protected area, but it's also isolated enough that they could have been here for days without being found." As the team worked, Rodriguez tried calling the phone number from David Chen's emergency contact card. The call went straight to a voicemail system with a generic message. She left a detailed message explaining that evidence had been found that might be related to David Chen's 2010 disappearance. By late afternoon, the team had thoroughly documented and collected all visible evidence from the site. Rodriguez sealed the items in evidence bags and prepared them for transport to the Sheriff's Department laboratory. "What happens now?" Morrison asked as they prepared to leave. "We'll process everything we found, try to extract data from that camera if possible, and make formal contact with the Chen family," Rodriguez said. "If this is confirmed to be David Chen's equipment, we'll need to determine whether we're looking at an accident, natural causes, or something else." Morrison gathered his photography equipment, his original mission forgotten. He had come to Joshua Tree to capture the desert's beauty, but instead had uncovered what might be the key to solving an 8-year-old mystery. Rodriguez drove back to the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department headquarters in San Bernardino, the evidence bags secured in her vehicle. As she walked into the building, she was already formulating her approach to reopening the David Chen case. The original case file was thick, containing witness statements, search reports, and dozens of photographs from the 2010 investigation. Rodriguez spread the documents across her desk and began reviewing the details. David Chen had been a 29-year-old graduate student in environmental science at UC Berkeley. He had driven to Joshua Tree National Park on October 12, 2010, for what was supposed to be a 3-day solo hiking and research trip. When he failed to return to Berkeley by October 16th, his sister Rebecca had contacted park authorities. The original search had involved park rangers, sheriff's deputies, search and rescue volunteers, and helicopter units. They had covered over 50 square miles around the area where Chen's Honda Civic was found, parked at Skull Rock. Despite the extensive effort, no trace of Chen or his equipment had been discovered. Rodriguez noted that the original investigation had been thorough, but limited by the technology available in 2010. GPS units were less precise, digital photography was lower quality, and social media tracking was not yet a standard investigative tool. She spent the evening reviewing every detail of the original case file, preparing for what she suspected would become a complex investigation. The discovery of Chen's equipment after 8 years raised new questions about what had happened in October 2010. At 9:30 p.m., Rodriguez's desk phone rang. The caller ID showed the 5-10 area code from David Chen's emergency contact card. "Detective Rodriguez, this is Rebecca Chen. I got your message about finding evidence related to my brother David." Rebecca Chen arrived at the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department at 8 a.m. the next morning, having driven through the night from her home in Oakland. She was 35 years old now, 6 years older than David had been when he disappeared. The years of uncertainty had taken their toll, visible in the tension around her eyes and the careful way she carried herself. Detective Rodriguez met her in the lobby and escorted her to a conference room where the evidence collected from Joshua Tree was laid out on a table. Each item was sealed in a clear evidence bag with detailed labels. "Ms. Chen, I want to prepare you for what you're about to see," Rodriguez said gently. "These items have been exposed to desert conditions for potentially 8 years. Rebecca nodded, steeling herself. "I need to know. I've been waiting for any news about David for almost a decade." Rodriguez guided her through each piece of evidence. Rebecca immediately identified the water bottle, pointing to a small dent near the bottom. "David dropped this during a camping trip we took together in Yosemite in 2009. He was always careful with his gear, but he was climbing over some rocks and it fell. He kept using it even though it was dented." She examined the emergency contact card through the plastic bag. This is definitely David's handwriting. He was always meticulous about safety procedures. He made these cards for every hiking trip. The hiking boot was more difficult to identify conclusively, but Rebecca recognized the brand and size. David wore Merrill boots, size 10.5. This looks like the same model he had. Rodriguez showed her photographs of the digital camera. Do you recognize this equipment? David was serious about photography. He had a Canon camera that he took on all his outdoor trips. He wanted to document his environmental research. Rebecca paused, studying the images. Can you get the pictures from it? Our technical team is working on that. The memory card might have survived even if the camera electronics are damaged. Rodriguez opened the original case file from 2010. I've been reviewing your brother's disappearance investigation. Tell me about the days leading up to his trip to Joshua Tree. Rebecca settled back in her chair, organizing her memories. David was working on his master's thesis in environmental science at UC Berkeley. His focus was desert ecosystem adaptation. He had been planning this Joshua Tree trip for weeks as part of his research. Was he an experienced hiker? Very experienced. David had been hiking and camping since high school. He knew desert safety protocols, always carried extra water, had emergency equipment. That's why his disappearance never made sense to me. Rodriguez took detailed notes. The original report indicates he was supposed to return by October 16, 2010. When did you first become concerned? David was supposed to call me when he got back to Berkeley on October 15th. When I didn't hear from him by the evening of October 16th, I called his apartment. His roommate said he hadn't returned. I contacted the park the next morning. Tell me about David's state of mind before the trip. Was he dealing with any personal problems, financial issues, relationship troubles? Rebecca shook her head firmly. David was focused and happy. He loved his graduate program, was excited about his research. He had a girlfriend, Elena Vasquez, who was also in the environmental science program. They had been together for about a year. Rodriguez made a note about the girlfriend. Is Elena still in the area? I'd like to speak with her. She finished her program and moved to Colorado in 2012. I can get you her contact information. Elena was devastated by David's disappearance. She helped organize search volunteers in 2010. Rodriguez pulled out a map of Joshua Tree National Park and spread it on the table. The evidence was found here, about 2 miles from where David's car was parked at Skull Rock. Does this area have any significance? Did David mention planning to hike in this specific location? Rebecca studied the map carefully. David mentioned wanting to photograph some of the rock formations, but he didn't give me specifics. He usually planned his routes based on geological features and plant diversity. Did he typically hike alone? Often, yes. David said solo hiking helped him focus on his observations and photography, but he was always careful about telling people his plans and expected return times. Rodriguez showed Rebecca copies of the original missing person report and search documentation. The initial search covered over 50 square miles. Multiple agencies were involved, including helicopters and ground teams. I was here for 2 weeks during that search, Rebecca said. I stayed at a motel in 29 Palms and joined the volunteer search teams every day. We covered so much ground, but found nothing. The search was eventually called off due to resource limitations and the lack of any leads. Rebecca's expression hardened. That was the most difficult part, just stopping, not knowing. For 8 years, I've wondered if David was somewhere out there, if he needed help, if he was alive. Rodriguez leaned forward sympathetically. Finding this evidence gives us new leads to pursue, but I need to ask some difficult questions about David's personal life. I understand. Did David have any enemies? Anyone who might have wanted to harm him? No. David was universally liked. He was quiet, studious, environmentally conscious. He didn't drink much, didn't use drugs, wasn't involved in anything dangerous or controversial. What about his research? Could that have put him in contact with anyone who might be hostile to environmental studies? Rebecca considered this. David's work was academic. He wasn't doing anything politically controversial, just studying plant adaptation mechanisms. I can't imagine that making him any enemies. Rodriguez showed her photographs of the discovery site. This location is quite remote, in a natural depression surrounded by rocks. It's not visible from main hiking trails. David liked exploring off the beaten path. He said the best research happened away from where most tourists went. Did he have specialized equipment for navigation? GPS units? Detailed maps? David had a handheld GPS unit, topographical maps, and a compass. He was very methodical about navigation and route planning. Rodriguez made extensive notes about David's equipment and preparation methods. The picture emerging was of an experienced, well-prepared hiker who understood desert safety protocols. "Ms. Chen, I need to discuss what might happen next in this investigation. We're treating this as a potential homicide case until we can determine otherwise." Rebecca absorbed this information carefully. "You think someone hurt David?" "We're considering all possibilities. An experienced hiker like your brother, well-prepared and safety-conscious, doesn't just disappear without a trace. The location where we found his equipment raises questions." Rodriguez's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and looked up. "Our technical team has preliminary results from the digital camera. They were able to extract some images from the memory card." "What kind of images?" "Photos from David's hiking trip. The last images were taken on October 13th, 2010, the day after he arrived at Joshua Tree. I'd like you to look at them and tell me if you see anything unusual." Rodriguez led Rebecca to the Technical Services Department, where computer specialist Janet Wong had the recovered images displayed on a large monitor. "We were able to recover 47 photos," Wong explained. "They show David's camping setup, various rock formations, plant life, and landscape shots. Most appear to be related to his research." The photos showed David's methodical documentation approach. He had photographed geological features, desert plants, and his campsite setup. Rebecca recognized his careful composition style and attention to detail. "These look like typical David photos," she said. "Very systematic, focused on his research interests." Wong clicked through to the final images. "These last few photos are different. They show what appears to be some kind of confrontation or meeting. The images showed a figure in the distance, too far away to identify clearly. The photos were slightly blurred, as if taken quickly or while moving." "David was photographing someone," Rodriguez observed. "These don't look like his planned research shots." Rebecca leaned closer to the monitor. David would photograph people he met on trails sometimes, especially other researchers or park personnel. Wong enhanced the images digitally, but the figure remained too distant and blurred for positive identification. The photos suggested David had encountered someone in the remote area where his equipment was later found. "This is our first lead," Rodriguez said. "David met someone in that location on October 13, 2010. We need to identify who that person was." Rebecca stared at the final photograph, taken at 3:47 p.m. on October 13th, according to the camera's timestamp. "This might be the last photo David ever took." Rodriguez began formulating her investigation strategy. The evidence now included not just David's equipment, but photographic proof that he had encountered someone in the remote desert location where he ultimately disappeared. "Ms. Chen, I'm going to need to interview everyone who was connected to the original investigation. Park rangers, search team members, anyone who had contact with David or knowledge of his plans. I want to help with the investigation. I appreciate that, but I need you to let the professionals handle this. What I can do is keep you informed of our progress and consult with you when we need information about David." Rebecca agreed reluctantly. After 8 years of not knowing, she was impatient for answers, but she understood the need for proper police procedure. As they concluded the interview, Rodriguez felt the weight of reopening an 8-year-old case. The new evidence provided hope for resolution, but also raised disturbing questions about what had happened to David Chen in the remote desert of Joshua Tree National Park. Detective Rodriguez drove to Joshua Tree National Park early the next morning to interview personnel who had been working during David Chen's 2010 visit. She started at the visitor center, where she met with Chief Ranger Patricia Williams, who had been in charge of park operations for over 15 years. "I remember the Chen case very well," Williams said, pulling out a thick folder from her filing cabinet. "It was one of our most extensive search operations. We coordinated with multiple agencies for 2 weeks. Williams spread out the search grid maps on her desk, showing the areas that had been systematically covered by ground teams and helicopters. Red X marks indicated the locations where Chen's Honda Civic had been found and where search efforts had been concentrated. The search focused on this area around Skull Rock and extended outward in a radius pattern," Williams explained. "We assumed Chen had gotten lost or injured somewhere within walking distance of his car." Rodriguez compared the search maps to the GPS coordinates where Jake Morrison had found the evidence. "The discovery site is here, about 2 miles northeast. Was this area searched in 2010? Williams examined the coordinates carefully. That location was within our extended search grid, but it's in a very difficult area to access. The terrain is rough, and it's not near any established trails. Who would have been responsible for searching that specific area? Let me check the assignment logs. Williams consulted her computer database. That sector was assigned to Ranger Bill Patterson and a volunteer search team on October 19, 2010. Is Patterson still working here? Bill retired in 2016, but he lives locally in 29 Palms. He worked here for 25 years and knew the park better than anyone. Rodriguez made a note to interview Patterson. Were there any other unusual incidents or missing person cases around the same time period? Williams reviewed her records. October 2010 was actually quite busy. We had 3 separate missing hiker cases that month. Chen's case got the most attention because of the extensive search effort, but there was also a day hiker who got lost near Hidden Valley and a rock climber who had an accident at real Hidden Valley. What happened with those other cases? The day hiker was found after 8 hours, dehydrated but okay. The rock climber was airlifted out with injuries but recovered. Both were resolved quickly. Rodriguez asked for copies of all incident reports from October 2010. Williams provided her with a comprehensive folder containing dispatch logs, search assignments, and incident summaries. Is there anything about the Chen case that struck you as unusual at the time? Williams considered the question carefully. The thing that puzzled us was how completely David Chen seemed to vanish. Usually when someone gets lost or injured in the desert, we find some trace. Footprints, disturbed vegetation, dropped equipment. With Chen, it was as if he just disappeared. Did Chen interact with any park personnel during his visit? Let me check our visitor contact logs. Williams accessed her computer system. Chen registered his backcountry camping permit on October 12th. The ranger who processed his permit was Bill Patterson. Rodriguez felt a spike of interest. Patterson was the last park employee to have documented contact with Chen. According to our records, yes, Bill would have reviewed Chen's hiking plans and provided safety briefings. It was standard procedure for backcountry permits. I need to speak with Patterson as soon as possible. Williams provided Rodriguez with Patterson's contact information and directions to his house in 29 Palms. She also gave Rodriguez a copy of Chen's original backcountry permit application, which contained his planned camping locations and expected return date. Rodriguez drove to 29 Palms, a small desert community adjacent to the national park. Patterson's house was a modest single-story structure, with xeriscaped landscaping and a detached garage converted into what appeared to be a workshop. Bill Patterson answered the door promptly. He was in his early 60s, lean and weathered from decades of desert work. His eyes were alert and he moved with the careful precision of someone accustomed to dangerous terrain. Detective Rodriguez? Pat Williams called and said you wanted to discuss the Chen case from 2010. That's correct. We found evidence that might be related to David Chen's disappearance. Patterson invited her into his living room, which was decorated with photographs of Joshua Tree landscapes and memorabilia from his ranger career. He offered coffee, which Rodriguez accepted. I remember David Chen, Patterson said, settling into a chair across from her. Young guy, graduate student from Berkeley, very well prepared, knew what he was doing in the desert. Tell me about your interaction with him when he applied for the backcountry permit. Patterson's recollection was detailed and precise. Chen came to the visitor center on October 12th, around 9 a.m. He wanted to camp in the backcountry for research purposes. I reviewed his equipment list, discussed water requirements, emergency procedures, wildlife precautions. Did he mention specific locations he planned to visit? He had topographical maps with several areas marked. He was interested in geological formations and plant communities in the remote areas of the park. Patterson paused, thinking. He asked about access routes to some of the less visited rock formations. Rodriguez showed him the GPS coordinates where the evidence had been found. Do you recognize this location? Patterson studied the coordinates and nodded slowly. That's in the area he was asking about. It's not an easy place to reach. Requires some scrambling over rocks and careful navigation. You searched that area during the 2010 investigation. Patterson's expression became more guarded. I searched many areas during those 2 weeks. The terrain out there is challenging, lots of hidden canyons and rock formations. Our records show you were assigned to search that specific sector on October 19, 2010. That's probably correct. I don't recall every detail from searches that long ago. Rodriguez sensed some reluctance in Patterson's responses. She pulled out photographs of the evidence recovered from the site. We found David Chen's water bottle, hiking boot, emergency contact card, and camera equipment at that location. The camera contained photos taken on October 13th, the day after Chen registered his permit with you. Patterson examined the photographs carefully. I'm glad you finally found something. That case bothered me for years. Why did it bother you? Chen was the type of hiker who shouldn't just disappear. He was experienced, well-prepared, had proper equipment. When someone like that vanishes without a trace, it usually means something specific happened. Rodriguez leaned forward. What do you think happened? Patterson was quiet for a long moment. In 25 years as a ranger, I saw a lot of accidents, medical emergencies, people getting lost. But I also saw some things that weren't accidents, such as the desert attracts all kinds of people. Most are legitimate hikers, campers, researchers, but some come here for other reasons. Drug trafficking, illegal dumping, people trying to hide from something or someone. Rodriguez made careful notes. Did you encounter any suspicious activity in October 2010? There were always reports of unusual activity. Vehicles in remote areas, lights seen at night where they shouldn't be, people avoiding contact with rangers. Anything specific to the time period when Chen disappeared? Patterson hesitated again. There were some reports of vehicles in remote areas around that time. Nothing that rose to the level of formal investigation. Rodriguez pressed for more details. What kind of vehicles? Where were they seen? Maintenance vehicles, mostly. The Park Service contracts with various companies for infrastructure work, trail maintenance, that sort of thing. Sometimes contractors work in remote areas. Did you investigate these reports? I filed the reports with my supervisor. Whether they were investigated further would have been above my pay grade. Rodriguez sensed Patterson was withholding information. Mr. Patterson, we're treating David Chen's disappearance as a potential homicide. If you have information that could help us understand what happened, I need to know. Patterson stood up and walked to his kitchen, returning with the coffee pot to refill their cups. He seemed to be using the time to consider his response. Detective, I was a ranger for 25 years. I followed protocols, filed reports, did my job. If there were things going on in the park that I wasn't supposed to ask questions about, well, I learned to focus on my assigned duties. Are you saying there was corruption or illegal activity that was being covered up? I'm saying that big organizations sometimes have activities that regular employees aren't meant to know about. I was never told directly to look the other way, but I was also never encouraged to investigate too deeply into certain matters. Rodriguez realized she might be uncovering something larger than a simple missing person case. Was David Chen's disappearance connected to these other activities? I don't know, but I do know that the search for Chen was called off much more quickly than usual for that type of case. Normally, we would have continued searching for weeks, maybe months. Who made the decision to end the search? That would have come from the park superintendent's office, probably in consultation with the sheriff's department. Rodriguez asked for the names of other personnel who had been involved in the Chen investigation. Patterson provided her with a list of rangers, search and rescue coordinators, and administrative staff. Is there anything else about that time period that I should know? Patterson walked to his window and looked out at the desert landscape. Detective, David Chen was a good kid who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I hope you find out what really happened to him. As Rodriguez prepared to leave, Patterson handed her a business card. If you need someone who knows the remote areas of the park, someone who understands how to navigate that terrain safely, call me. I may be retired, but I still know Joshua Tree better than most people. Rodriguez thanked Patterson and drove back toward San Bernardino, her mind working through the implications of his comments. The Chen case was becoming more complex, potentially involving corruption or illegal activities within the Park Service. She called Detective Supervisor John Marshall from her car. I need to expand the Chen investigation. This might be connected to larger issues at Joshua Tree National Park. Marshall authorized additional resources for the investigation, including forensic analysis of all evidence and background checks on Park Service personnel from 2010. Rodriguez spent the rest of the day reviewing personnel files and incident reports from Joshua Tree National Park, looking for patterns or connections to David Chen's disappearance. The case was expanding from a missing person investigation into something much more complex and potentially dangerous. Detective Rodriguez returned to Joshua Tree the following morning with crime scene technician Paul Hughes and Detective Lieutenant Sarah Kim, who specialized in corruption cases. They set up a temporary command post at the visitor center to review personnel files and interview additional witnesses. Lieutenant Kim had spent the previous evening researching Joshua Tree National Park's administrative structure in 2010. She spread organizational charts across their work table, highlighting key personnel and their responsibilities. The park superintendent in 2010 was Robert Hendricks, Kim explained. He retired in 2013 under circumstances that weren't entirely clear. There were allegations of mismanagement and irregular contracting practices. Rodriguez compared this to her notes from the Patterson interview. Patterson mentioned unusual contractor activity and vehicles in remote areas around the time Chen disappeared. Kim pulled out a thick folder containing contract records from 2010. I requested all Park Service contracts from that time period. There are several contracts with a company called Desert Maintenance Solutions for infrastructure work, trail maintenance, and equipment transportation. What's unusual about those contracts? The payment amounts are significantly higher than comparable services, and the work locations are often in remote areas with limited oversight. Also, Desert Maintenance Solutions was incorporated just 6 months before receiving the first Park Service contract. Hughes examined the GPS coordinates where Chen's evidence was found against the contract work locations. 3 of the desert maintenance contracts specify work sites within 2 miles of where we found Chen's equipment. Rodriguez felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to connect. We need to investigate Desert Maintenance Solutions and identify who was behind the company. Kim had already begun preliminary research. Desert Maintenance Solutions was owned by a holding company called Sierra Investment Group. The actual ownership is obscured by layers of shell companies, but I found some financial records that suggest connections to several Park Service employees, including anyone we've already interviewed. Still working on that. The financial connections are complex and deliberately hidden. Rodriguez's phone rang. The caller ID showed Rebecca Chen's number. Detective Rodriguez, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. There's something I didn't mention about David's research. What kind of information? David was interested in more than just plant adaptation. He was studying human impact on desert ecosystems. He mentioned finding evidence of illegal dumping or unauthorized activity in some of the remote areas he visited during previous trips. Rodriguez signaled Kim and Hughes to listen. Did he document this activity? David kept detailed research notes and photographs. He was planning to include environmental impact analysis in his thesis. I have copies of his research materials at home. I need to see those materials as soon as possible. I can drive down tomorrow with everything I have. After ending the call, Rodriguez shared the new information with her team. David Chen's environmental research might have uncovered illegal activities that someone wanted to keep hidden. Kim suggested they interview more Park Service personnel who had worked during the 2010 time period. They started with Maria Santos, who had been an administrative assistant in the superintendent's office. Santos, now working at Mojave National Preserve, agreed to meet them at a coffee shop in Barstow. She was a woman in her 50s who had worked for the Park Service for over 20 years. I remember the Chen case, Santos said. It was handled differently than other missing person cases. How so? Usually missing person investigations involved a lot of paperwork, coordination between multiple agencies, detailed documentation. With the Chen case, there seemed to be pressure to limit the documentation and wrap up the investigation quickly. Kim took detailed notes. Who was applying that pressure? It came from Superintendent Hendricks's office. He held meetings with senior staff about resource allocation and cost control. The message was clear, that extended search operations were not cost-effective. Rodriguez showed Santos the photographs of evidence found at the discovery site. Does this change your perspective on how the case was handled? Santos examined the images carefully. If David Chen's equipment was in a location that was supposedly searched, then either the search was inadequate or someone made sure the evidence wouldn't be found. Do you recall any specific instructions about the search areas or methods? Bill Patterson was given very specific sector assignments. I remember him questioning why certain areas were being excluded from the search grid, but he was told those decisions were made at a higher level. Kim pressed for more details about the park's administrative structure in 2010. Santos explained that Superintendent Hendricks had centralized decision-making and limited information sharing between departments. Hendricks brought in several new employees in 2009 and 2010, Santos said. Some of them didn't have traditional Park Service backgrounds. They seemed to be more focused on business operations than conservation. Rodriguez asked about Desert Maintenance Solutions. Santos recognized the name immediately. That company had extensive contracts with the park. They did work in remote areas that regular staff wasn't involved with. Hendricks handled those contracts personally. Did you ever see invoices or work reports from Desert Maintenance? The financial documentation for those contracts was handled separately from normal park operations. I wasn't given access to those records. Santos provided them with names of other employees who might have information about the unusual contracting arrangements and administrative changes in 2010. That afternoon, Rodriguez and Kim interviewed Thomas Bradley, who had been the search and rescue coordinator during the Chen investigation. Bradley was now working for San Bernardino County Emergency Services. The Chen search was frustrating, Bradley said. We had experienced volunteers, good weather conditions, and adequate resources, but we kept running into restrictions on where we could search and how long we could spend in certain areas. What kind of restrictions? We were told that some areas were off-limits due to contractor work or environmental protection concerns. When we requested access to those areas, the requests were denied or delayed until it was too late to be useful. Kim showed Bradley the map indicating where Chen's evidence was actually found. Was this area off-limits during the search? Bradley studied the coordinates. That specific location was in a sector that we were initially assigned to search, but then we were redirected to other areas. We were told there were safety concerns due to unstable rock formations. Did you believe that explanation? I've been doing search and rescue in this desert for 15 years. Those rock formations are no more dangerous than dozens of other areas we regularly search. The safety concern didn't make sense to me. Bradley provided Rodriguez with detailed documentation from the 2010 search, including maps showing the areas that had been searched and the areas that had been declared off-limits. Rodriguez compared Bradley's maps with the contract locations for Desert Maintenance Solutions. Every area that had been declared off-limits during the Chen search corresponded to locations where Desert Maintenance had active contracts. We need to track down the people behind Desert Maintenance Solutions, Rodriguez told Kim. I think we're looking at an organized conspiracy to use the park for illegal activities. Kim had been working her financial investigation throughout the day. I've traced Sierra Investment Group through several layers of shell companies. The ultimate ownership appears to lead to 3 individuals: Robert Hendricks, the former park superintendent, Marcus Webb, who was Hendricks' deputy, and William Patterson, the ranger we interviewed yesterday. Rodriguez felt a chill of realization. Patterson was involved in the illegal activities, and he searched the area where Chen's evidence was found. He made sure nothing was discovered. Kim nodded. Patterson wasn't reluctant to talk because he was afraid of revealing Park Service secrets. He was afraid of revealing his own criminal activities. Rodriguez reviewed her notes from the Patterson interview, seeing his responses in a new light. His knowledge of David Chen's research plans, his assignment to search the area where evidence was found, and his evasive answers all pointed to involvement in Chen's disappearance. We need surveillance on Patterson, Rodriguez said. If he realizes we're getting close to the truth, he might try to flee or destroy evidence. Kim called for additional resources, while Rodriguez began preparing arrest warrants for Patterson, Hendricks, and Webb. The case had evolved from a missing person investigation into a complex conspiracy involving Park Service corruption, illegal activities, and potentially murder. Hughes had been processing the physical evidence while Rodriguez and Kim conducted interviews. He called them with preliminary results from the forensic analysis. The camera equipment shows signs of deliberate damage, Hughes reported. Someone tried to destroy the memory card, but they didn't succeed completely. We've recovered additional images that weren't visible in the initial analysis. What do the new images show? Clear photographs of vehicles and equipment in the area where Chen disappeared. The images show what appears to be an illegal dumping operation, with trucks depositing industrial waste in a remote area of the park. Rodriguez realized they now had photographic evidence of the illegal activities that David Chen had discovered, and that had likely led to his murder. The conspiracy was larger and more dangerous than she had initially suspected. The investigation was entering its most critical phase, with evidence pointing to a network of corruption that had operated within Joshua Tree National Park for years. David Chen had been killed because he had stumbled upon activities that threatened to expose the conspiracy. Rodriguez prepared for what she knew would be a dangerous phase of the investigation, as the suspects realized that their 8-year cover-up was unraveling. Detective Rodriguez coordinated with Lieutenant Kim to establish surveillance on Bill Patterson's house in 29 Palms. They positioned unmarked vehicles at strategic points around Patterson's neighborhood and installed electronic monitoring equipment to track his communications and movements. By 6 a.m., Rodriguez was reviewing the overnight surveillance reports when her phone buzzed with an urgent message from the monitoring team. Patterson had made 3 phone calls to numbers registered to Robert Hendricks and Marcus Webb, the other conspirators identified in Kim's financial investigation. "He's warning them," Rodriguez told Kim. "Patterson knows we're closing in." Kim had spent the night obtaining search warrants for all 3 suspects' properties and financial records. "We have authority to move on all of them simultaneously. I've coordinated with federal marshals since this involves multiple jurisdictions." Rodriguez assembled a tactical team consisting of county sheriff's deputies, federal marshals, and Park Service law enforcement rangers. The operation would involve simultaneous arrests and property searches in 3 different locations. At 8:30 a.m., Rodriguez approached Patterson's house with 2 deputies as backup. She could see Patterson through the front window, pacing anxiously while talking on his cell phone. Rodriguez knocked loudly on the front door. "Mr. Patterson, this is Detective Rodriguez. I need to speak with you immediately." Patterson opened the door, his face showing the strain of a sleepless night. "Detective, this isn't a good time." "William Patterson, you're under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and suspicion of murder in connection with the death of David Chen." Rodriguez read him his Miranda rights while the deputies secured the scene. Patterson's reaction was not surprise but resignation. "I want to talk to a lawyer." "That's your right. But before we go any further, I want to give you an opportunity to explain your involvement in David Chen's death." Rodriguez had learned that suspects sometimes revealed information before formally requesting legal representation, especially when confronted with overwhelming evidence. Patterson sat heavily in his living room chair. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. This is bigger than David Chen. Explain it to me." Patterson looked out his window at the desert landscape he had patrolled for 25 years. "Hendricks approached me in 2009 with a business opportunity. He said the Park Service budget was being cut, and employees needed to find ways to supplement their income." "What kind of business opportunity?" "Desert Maintenance Solutions was supposed to be legitimate contract work. Hendricks said we would bid on Park Service contracts and use our knowledge to provide better services than outside companies." Rodriguez kept her voice neutral, encouraging Patterson to continue. "But it wasn't just legitimate contract work. At first it was. We did actual maintenance, trail work, equipment transportation, but then Hendricks started getting contracts for waste disposal and environmental remediation. You were illegally dumping industrial waste in the park." Patterson nodded slowly. "Companies in Los Angeles and San Bernardino were paying enormous fees to dispose of industrial waste legally. Hendricks realized we could offer the same service at much lower cost by dumping the waste in remote areas of the park." "How long had this been going on when David Chen disappeared?" "About a year. We had dumped waste at dozens of locations throughout the park. The money was incredible. Each of us was making more from the illegal dumping than from our Park Service salaries." Rodriguez had been recording the conversation on her phone. "Tell me what happened when David Chen encountered your operation." Patterson's composure began to crack. "Chen wasn't supposed to be in that area. His backcountry permit indicated he was planning to camp in a different location. But he changed his plans. Chen was methodical about his research. He was documenting human impacts on desert ecosystems. He had GPS coordinates for areas where he suspected illegal activity based on changes in vegetation patterns and water quality." Rodriguez realized David Chen's environmental expertise had made him a threat to the dumping operation. He found evidence of the illegal waste disposal. Chen had been documenting illegal dumping sites throughout the Mojave Desert as part of his thesis research. When he applied for the backcountry permit, I realized he was specifically targeting areas where we had active dumping operations. "So you warned Hendricks and Webb?" Patterson stood up and walked to his kitchen, where he poured himself a glass of water with shaking hands. "Hendricks said we needed to monitor Chen's activities and make sure he didn't discover our operations." "How were you monitoring him?" "I was assigned to track Chen's movements during his camping trip. I knew his planned route and camping locations from his permit application." Rodriguez felt the pieces of the murder coming together. Zhao followed David Chen to the remote area where his evidence was found. "I was supposed to observe Chen and report his activities to Hendricks. But when I found Chen at one of our dumping sites, photographing the waste containers and taking soil samples, I knew we were in serious trouble. What happened next? Patterson returned to his chair, his head in his hands. I confronted Chen about what he was doing. I told him he was trespassing in a dangerous area and needed to leave immediately. But Chen didn't leave. Chen showed me his photographs and soil samples. He said he had documentation of illegal dumping throughout the park and was planning to include it in his thesis and report it to federal environmental authorities. Rodriguez leaned forward. So you killed him to protect your illegal operation? Patterson looked up with tears in his eyes. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. I was trying to convince Chen to forget what he had seen, maybe even offer him money to keep quiet. But David Chen wouldn't be bought off. Chen said he had a moral obligation to report environmental crimes. He said people like me were destroying the desert ecosystems he was trying to protect. Patterson described the final confrontation in detail. David Chen had refused to surrender his photographs and research materials. When Patterson tried to forcibly take Chen's camera and backpack, a struggle ensued. Chen was younger and stronger than me, Patterson said. But I had a taser from my Park Service equipment. When Chen tried to run away, I used the taser to stop him. And then? The taser caused Chen to fall and hit his head on one of the rock formations. He was unconscious and bleeding heavily. Rodriguez asked for specific details about David Chen's injuries and Patterson's actions afterward. Patterson admitted that instead of calling for medical help, he had called Hendricks and Webb to report the situation. Hendricks and Webb arrived with trucks and equipment within 2 hours. They said we needed to make Chen's death look like a hiking accident. How did they dispose of the body? Patterson's voice became almost inaudible. They loaded Chen's body in one of the trucks and transported it to a waste disposal site. Chen was buried with industrial waste at a location about 50 miles from Joshua Tree. Rodriguez felt sick, but continued questioning. What about Chen's equipment? Hendricks wanted to scatter Chen's equipment in different locations to make it look like he had been attacked by animals or died of exposure. But I convinced them to hide everything in the rock formation where Chen had been injured. Why? I thought if Chen's body was never found, his family would eventually assume he had died in an accident. If we scattered his equipment, it might lead to more questions about what really happened. Patterson explained that they had carefully hidden David Chen's equipment in the rock crevices, believing it would never be discovered. The illegal dumping operation had continued for several more years until Hendricks retired in 2013. Rodriguez asked about other victims. Were there other people who discovered your illegal activities? Chen was the only person who posed a serious threat to our operation. Most hikers and campers stayed in the popular areas of the park. Chen's research specifically targeted remote locations where illegal activities might occur. Patterson provided detailed information about the locations where industrial waste had been dumped and where David Chen's body was buried. The information would allow authorities to recover Chen's remains and begin environmental remediation of the contaminated areas. As Rodriguez concluded the interview, she reflected on the tragic irony that David Chen, who had dedicated his life to protecting desert ecosystems, had been murdered by people who were systematically destroying the environment he loved. Patterson was transported to the San Bernardino County Jail, where he would be held pending trial on multiple felony charges. Rodriguez coordinated with the tactical teams conducting simultaneous arrests of Hendricks and Webb, both of whom were taken into custody without incident. The David Chen case had uncovered a conspiracy that had operated for years within Joshua Tree National Park, involving illegal waste disposal, corruption and murder. The investigation was far from over, as authorities worked to assess the full extent of the environmental damage and identify all the individuals and companies involved in the illegal dumping operation. Rodriguez called Rebecca Chen to inform her that arrests had been made and that her brother's remains would hopefully be recovered soon. After 8 years of uncertainty, Rebecca would finally have answers about what had happened to David. Detective Rodriguez coordinated with federal environmental authorities, the FBI, and Park Service investigators to plan the recovery of David Chen's remains and the investigation of illegal dumping sites throughout the Mojave Desert. The operation required specialized equipment for hazardous waste handling and forensic recovery in potentially contaminated areas. Patterson had provided GPS coordinates for the location where David Chen's body was buried. approximately 50 miles northeast of Joshua Tree National Park, in a remote area of Bureau of Land Management property. The site was part of an extensive illegal dumping operation that had been active from 2009 to 2013. FBI Special Agent Jennifer Walsh took charge of the federal aspects of the investigation, which involved interstate transportation of illegal waste, federal conspiracy charges, and environmental crimes. Walsh had extensive experience with environmental crime cases and understood the complexity of prosecuting multi-jurisdictional conspiracies. Patterson's confession provides us with the framework of the conspiracy, Walsh explained to Rodriguez during a briefing at the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. But we need physical evidence to corroborate his statements and identify all the participants. The recovery team assembled at the suspected burial site included forensic anthropologists, hazardous materials specialists, environmental investigators, and medical examiners. The area was cordoned off and declared a crime scene, while teams prepared for what could be a weeks-long recovery operation. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a forensic anthropologist from UC San Diego, led the search for David Chen's remains. Using ground-penetrating radar and careful excavation techniques, her team began the methodical process of locating and recovering the body. Meanwhile, Rodriguez interviewed Marcus Webb, who had been arrested at his home in Riverside. Webb was the deputy superintendent who had helped coordinate the illegal dumping operation with Patterson and Hendricks. Webb initially denied any involvement in illegal activities, claiming he had only performed legitimate administrative duties for Desert Maintenance Solutions. But when confronted with Patterson's detailed confession and financial evidence showing his ownership stake in the company, Webb became more cooperative. "I want to make a deal," Webb told Rodriguez through his attorney. "I'll provide information about the extent of the illegal dumping and the companies that paid us to dispose of their waste." Rodriguez coordinated with federal prosecutors to determine what cooperation agreement might be appropriate. Webb's information could be crucial for identifying the full scope of the environmental crimes and recovering damages from the companies that had participated in illegal waste disposal. Webb provided detailed records showing that Desert Maintenance Solutions had contracts with over 30 companies in California and Nevada to dispose of industrial waste. The companies had paid significantly less than legal disposal costs, while Desert Maintenance had dumped the waste at dozens of locations throughout public lands in California and Nevada. "The money was enormous," Webb admitted during a recorded interview. "We were making hundreds of thousands of dollars per year from companies that thought they were paying for legitimate waste disposal." Rodriguez asked about David Chen's murder. "Were you present when David Chen was killed?" "I didn't participate in the confrontation with Chen. Patterson called me and Hendricks after Chen was already injured. We were told we needed to help cover up what had happened. Describe your involvement in covering up the murder." Webb explained that he had helped transport David Chen's body and equipment using Desert Maintenance Solutions trucks. He provided detailed information about the burial site and the methods used to conceal the crime. "We thought if Chen's body was never found, the case would eventually be closed as an accidental death or disappearance. Hikers disappear in the desert sometimes, and we figured this would just be another unsolved case." Webb's cooperation provided investigators with additional evidence about the conspiracy and helped identify other individuals who might have been involved in the illegal activities. At the recovery site, Dr. Martinez's team made the first significant discovery on the third day of excavation. Ground-penetrating radar had identified anomalies in the soil consistent with a buried body, and careful excavation revealed clothing and personal effects. "We've found remains that are consistent with an adult male buried approximately 8 years ago," Dr. Martinez reported to Rodriguez. "The preservation is better than expected due to the dry desert conditions and the way the body was buried." The forensic recovery process took several more days, as the team carefully documented and collected all physical evidence from the burial site. In addition to David Chen's remains, they found industrial waste containers, contaminated soil samples, and equipment that corroborated Patterson's confession. Rodriguez called Rebecca Chen to inform her that her brother's body had been found. Rebecca had been staying in a hotel in San Bernardino, waiting for news from the investigation. "We've recovered David's remains," Rodriguez told her gently. "The forensic examination will take some time, but we'll be able to provide you with closure and proceed with proper burial arrangements." Rebecca's response was a mixture of grief and relief. "Thank you for not giving up." After 8 years of not knowing, I can finally say goodbye to David properly. The forensic examination confirmed that the remains were those of David Chen, identified through dental records and DNA analysis. The medical examiner determined that Chen had died from blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with Patterson's account of the confrontation. While the recovery operation continued, Rodriguez and Agent Walsh interviewed Robert Hendricks, the former park superintendent who had been the mastermind of the illegal dumping conspiracy. Hendricks had been arrested at his retirement home in Arizona and transported back to California to face federal charges. Hendricks initially claimed that any illegal activities had been conducted without his knowledge by subordinate employees, but faced with extensive financial evidence and detailed confessions from Patterson and Webb, his defense strategy became untenable. Hendricks was the architect of the entire operation, Walsh explained to Rodriguez. He used his position as park superintendent to identify remote dumping locations, coordinate with waste disposal companies, and cover up the illegal activities. Hendricks eventually agreed to cooperate with federal investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. His information revealed that the illegal dumping conspiracy had operated in multiple national parks and public lands throughout the western United States, involving dozens of Park Service employees and hundreds of companies. The environmental investigation revealed extensive contamination at over 40 dumping sites throughout California and Nevada. The cleanup costs were estimated at over $50 million, which would be recovered from the companies that had participated in illegal waste disposal. Rodriguez compiled her final report on David Chen's murder, documenting how an environmental science graduate student's dedication to protecting desert ecosystems had led to his death at the hands of corrupt Park Service employees. The case had revealed a conspiracy that had operated for years within the national park system, involving illegal waste disposal, corruption, murder, and cover-up. The investigation had exposed institutional failures that had allowed the conspiracy to operate without detection for an extended period. Patterson, Webb, and Hendricks all faced federal charges including conspiracy, environmental crimes, obstruction of justice, and murder. The companies that had participated in illegal waste disposal faced civil and criminal penalties totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. Rebecca Chen worked with Rodriguez to plan a memorial service for David Chen, which would be held at UC Berkeley, where he had been a graduate student. The service would honor David's commitment to environmental protection and raise awareness about the ongoing challenges of protecting public lands from illegal activities. Rodriguez reflected on the case as she prepared her final reports. David Chen's murder had been solved after 8 years, but the investigation had uncovered systemic problems that extended far beyond a single conspiracy. The case highlighted the need for stronger oversight of activities on public lands and better protection for environmental researchers who might uncover illegal activities. The recovery of David Chen's remains marked the end of one phase of the investigation, but the broader environmental crime case would continue for years as federal authorities worked to prosecute all the individuals and companies involved in the illegal dumping conspiracy. 3 weeks after the arrests of Patterson, Webb, and Hendricks, Detective Rodriguez received an urgent call from FBI Special Agent Walsh. Federal surveillance teams monitoring the suspect's communications had intercepted messages indicating that other members of the conspiracy were planning to flee the country before they could be arrested. "We've identified at least 6 other Park Service employees who were involved in the illegal dumping operation," Walsh explained. "They've been monitoring news coverage of the arrests and realize they're likely to be charged soon." Rodriguez met Walsh at the FBI field office in San Bernardino, where a task force had been assembled to coordinate the apprehension of the remaining suspects. The fugitives included rangers, administrative personnel, and contractors from multiple national parks throughout California and Nevada. The primary targets are Thomas Garrett and Lisa Chen, no relation to David Chen, who managed dumping operations at Death Valley National Park, Walsh said. "Our intelligence suggests they're planning to leave the country through Mexico within the next 48 hours. Rodriguez studied photographs and background information on Garrett and Chen. Both had worked for the Park Service for over 15 years and had been involved in the illegal dumping conspiracy since its inception in 2009. What's their connection to David Chen's murder? According to Webb's latest statements, Garrett and Lisa Chen helped plan the cover-up after David Chen was killed. They provided equipment and personnel to dispose of the body and eliminate evidence. The task force received real-time intelligence from surveillance teams, monitoring the fugitives' movements. Garrett and Lisa Chen had withdrawn large amounts of cash from bank accounts and purchased airline tickets to Mexico City under false identities. They're planning to board a flight from Los Angeles International Airport at 6:30 p.m. today, Walsh reported. We need to intercept them before they reach the airport. Rodriguez coordinated with California Highway Patrol and Los Angeles Police Department to establish checkpoints on routes leading to LAX. The fugitives were driving a white Ford pickup truck registered to Desert Maintenance Solutions and would likely use Interstate 15 to reach Los Angeles. At 2:00 p.m., a highway patrol officer spotted the white pickup truck on Interstate 15 near Barstow. The officer confirmed the license plate number and began following the vehicle while maintaining radio contact with the task force. Suspects are heading west on I-15 at mile marker 142, the patrol officer reported. 2 occupants in the vehicle, driving at normal speed. Rodriguez and Walsh positioned their team at a strategic location near Victorville, where they could intercept the fugitives before they reached the heavily populated Los Angeles area. They coordinated with multiple law enforcement agencies to ensure a safe apprehension. At 3:15 p.m., the white pickup truck approached the Victorville area. Rodriguez could see 2 occupants through the windshield, matching the photographs of Garrett and Lisa Chen. The driver appeared to be following GPS navigation and showed no indication of awareness that they were being followed. Walsh coordinated with highway patrol units to initiate a traffic stop, using unmarked vehicles to avoid creating a high-speed chase situation. The plan was to surround the pickup truck during a routine-appearing traffic stop and make arrests before the suspects could flee or destroy evidence. But as the patrol cars moved into position, Lisa Chen spotted the coordinated law enforcement presence and alerted Garrett. The pickup truck suddenly accelerated and began weaving between lanes, attempting to evade capture. Suspects are fleeing, Rodriguez radioed to the task force, initiating pursuit. The chase proceeded west on Interstate 15 at speeds exceeding 90 miles per hour. Garrett drove aggressively, using the pickup truck's power and handling to maintain distance from the pursuing police vehicles. Rodriguez followed the chase in an unmarked FBI vehicle, while Walsh coordinated with helicopter units and additional ground support. The fugitives had several advantages, including knowledge of desert back roads and the ability to abandon the interstate for more remote routes. After 20 minutes of high-speed pursuit, Garrett exited the interstate at a remote desert location and began driving on unpaved roads through Bureau of Land Management property. The pickup truck was better suited for off-road driving than most of the police vehicles, allowing the fugitives to increase their lead. They're heading toward Mojave National Preserve, Walsh reported. They probably know hiding places in the remote areas where they conducted illegal dumping operations. Rodriguez realized the fugitives were using their intimate knowledge of desert terrain to evade capture. As former Park Service employees, they understood how to navigate the vast, unmarked roads and hidden canyons of the Mojave Desert. The pursuit continued into increasingly remote terrain as the fugitives drove deeper into the desert. Helicopter units provided aerial surveillance, while ground units struggled to maintain contact on the rough, winding roads. At 4:30 p.m., the fugitives' pickup truck became stuck in sand while attempting to cross a dry lake bed. Garrett and Lisa Chen abandoned the vehicle and fled on foot into a rugged area of rock formations and desert vegetation. Rodriguez and Walsh arrived at the abandoned pickup truck within minutes. They found evidence that the fugitives had prepared for an extended evasion effort, including camping equipment, emergency supplies, and detailed maps of remote desert areas. They're prepared to survive in the desert for days or weeks, Walsh observed. We need to establish a perimeter and begin systematic search operations. The search area covered several square miles of challenging terrain, similar to where David Chen had been murdered 8 years earlier. The irony was not lost on Rodriguez that the investigation had brought them back to the same type of remote desert environment where the original crime had occurred. Rodriguez coordinated with search and rescue teams, while Walsh managed helicopter and ground units. The fugitives had approximately a 30-minute head start and were moving through terrain that would provide numerous hiding places among the rock formations and desert washes. As the sun began to set, the search took on increased urgency. Night temperatures in the desert could be dangerous for the fugitives, but darkness would also make them much more difficult to locate and apprehend. Rodriguez led a ground team following tracks and other signs of the fugitives' passage through the desert terrain. Her experience with the David Chen case had given her familiarity with the challenges of searching remote desert areas and the ways people could disappear in the vast landscape. At 6:00 p.m., just as the fugitives' original flight to Mexico was scheduled to depart, Rodriguez's team found evidence that Garrett and Lisa Chen were moving toward a known illegal dumping site about 3 miles from where they had abandoned their vehicle. "They're heading to a location where they're familiar with the terrain and might have supplies cached," Rodriguez radioed to the command post. "We need to intercept them before they reach that area." The search teams converged on the suspected dumping site, while helicopter units provided aerial surveillance with thermal imaging equipment. The desert chase was approaching its climax as law enforcement closed in on the fugitives, who had helped cover up David Chen's murder 8 years earlier. Rodriguez prepared for what she knew could be a dangerous confrontation, as the fugitives realized their escape attempt had failed, and they faced the prospect of spending the rest of their lives in prison for their involvement in environmental crimes and murder. The helicopter's thermal imaging system detected 2 heat signatures moving through a narrow canyon, approximately 1 mile from the illegal dumping site. Rodriguez coordinated ground teams to surround the area while maintaining safe distances to prevent the fugitives from becoming desperate enough to take hostages or engage in armed confrontation. "Garrett and Lisa Chen are trapped in Devil's Canyon," Walsh reported over the radio. "The canyon has limited exit points and we have teams positioned at both ends." Rodriguez approached the canyon entrance with a tactical team, including crisis negotiators and medical personnel. The rocky terrain provided numerous hiding places, but also limited the fugitives' options for escape. Using a bullhorn, Rodriguez called into the canyon, "Thomas Garrett and Lisa Chen, this is Detective Rodriguez with the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. You are surrounded and have no means of escape. Come out with your hands visible and no one will be harmed." The response came from somewhere deep in the canyon. "We're not going to prison for the rest of our lives. Leave us alone." Rodriguez recognized this as the beginning of a potential hostage negotiation situation, even though the fugitives were only holding themselves hostage. She signaled for the crisis negotiation team to take the lead while maintaining tactical positions. "Thomas, this is Sergeant Paula Martinez with the crisis negotiation team," the lead negotiator called into the canyon. "We want to resolve this situation safely for everyone involved. Can you tell me what you need right now?" The negotiation continued for over 2 hours as darkness fell across the desert. The fugitives alternately demanded helicopters for escape, immunity from prosecution, and other impossible concessions. But gradually the negotiators established communication and began addressing the underlying fears driving their desperate flight. "We know you didn't plan for David Chen to be killed," Martinez called to the fugitives. "Your involvement was in the cover-up afterward. That's a much different situation than first-degree murder." Rodriguez monitored the negotiations while coordinating with Walsh and other task force members. The longer the standoff continued, the more dangerous it became for everyone involved, including the fugitives who were not equipped for an extended period in the desert. At 11:30 p.m., Lisa Chen emerged from the canyon with her hands raised. She was exhausted, dehydrated, and emotionally drained from the failed escape attempt. "I can't do this anymore," she told Rodriguez as she was taken into custody. "Tom is still back there, but I think he's ready to give up too." Rodriguez and the negotiation team used Lisa Chen's surrender to encourage Garrett to end the standoff. They emphasized that his situation would only become worse if he continued to resist arrest, and that he needed medical attention after hours in the desert without adequate water. "Tom, Lisa is safe and receiving medical attention," Martinez called into the canyon. "We're concerned about your welfare. It's time to end this before someone gets hurt." At 12:45 a.m., Thomas Garrett finally emerged from the canyon. He was suffering from dehydration and exposure, but was conscious and able to walk with assistance. Medical personnel provided immediate treatment, while Rodriguez formally placed him under arrest. "I want to make a deal," Garrett said as he was being loaded into an ambulance. "I'll tell you everything about the illegal dumping operation and everyone who was involved." Rodriguez followed the ambulance to the hospital, while Walsh coordinated the processing of the crime scene and recovery of evidence from the canyon where the fugitives had hidden. The failed escape attempt had ended without violence, but had provided additional evidence of the conspiracy and the extent to which the participants would go to avoid prosecution. The next morning, Rodriguez interviewed Lisa Chen at the hospital, where she was being treated for dehydration and exhaustion. Chen had been involved in the illegal dumping operations at Death Valley National Park and had helped coordinate the cover-up of David Chen's murder. "I never intended for anyone to get killed," Chen said. "When Patterson called and said there had been an accident, we thought we were just helping cover up an unfortunate incident." Rodriguez pressed for specific details about Chen's involvement in the conspiracy. "Tell me about your role in disposing of David Chen's body and equipment." Chen provided a detailed account of how she and Garrett had driven from Death Valley to Joshua Tree with trucks and equipment to help dispose of David Chen's body. She corroborated Patterson's confession about the burial site and described the methods used to conceal the crime. "We thought if David Chen's body was never found, his disappearance would just be treated as another missing hiker case," Chen explained. "The desert is full of people who disappear and are never seen again." Rodriguez asked about other victims of the illegal dumping operation. "Were there other people who discovered your activities and were harmed or threatened?" "David Chen was the only person who posed a serious threat to our operations," Chen said. "Most people didn't venture into the remote areas where we were dumping waste, and Chen was specifically looking for evidence of environmental crimes." Chen's confession provided additional corroboration for the prosecution's case and helped identify other individuals and companies that had participated in the illegal dumping conspiracy. Her cooperation would be crucial for recovering environmental damages and ensuring that all responsible parties were held accountable. Thomas Garrett provided similar cooperation when Rodriguez interviewed him the following day. Garrett had been a senior ranger at Death Valley National Park and had used his position to facilitate illegal dumping operations throughout the Mojave Desert region. "The money was incredible," Garrett admitted. "We were making more from illegal waste disposal than we could have made in 20 years of legitimate park service work." Rodriguez asked Garrett to explain the full scope of the conspiracy. "How many Park Service employees were involved in illegal activities?" "At least 15 people across 4 different national parks," Garrett said. "Rangers, administrators, maintenance workers, contractors. It was a well-organized operation that had been running for years." Garrett provided detailed information about dumping sites, financial arrangements, and the companies that had paid for illegal waste disposal. His cooperation helped federal investigators understand the full extent of the environmental crimes and identify all the participants in the conspiracy. The successful apprehension of Garrett and Lisa Chen marked a major milestone in the investigation of David Chen's murder and the broader illegal dumping conspiracy. Rodriguez worked with federal prosecutors to prepare comprehensive charges against all the individuals and companies involved in the criminal enterprise. The case had grown from a single missing person investigation into one of the largest environmental crime cases in the history of the national park system. The illegal dumping operations had contaminated thousands of acres of public lands and generated millions of dollars in illegal profits. Rebecca Chen attended the arraignment proceedings for all the defendants, finding closure in seeing the people responsible for her brother's death held accountable for their crimes. She had waited 8 years for justice, and the comprehensive investigation had ensured that all aspects of the conspiracy were exposed and prosecuted. Rodriguez reflected on the case as she prepared final reports documenting the investigation and arrests. David Chen's dedication to environmental protection had ultimately led to the exposure of massive criminal enterprise that had operated within the national park system for years. His death had not been in vain, as it had led to reforms and oversight measures that would help prevent similar crimes in the future. The chase through the desert had brought the David Chen case to a dramatic conclusion, with all the major participants in custody and facing serious federal charges. The investigation had demonstrated the importance of thorough police work and interagency cooperation in solving complex cases involving multiple jurisdictions and sophisticated criminal enterprises. Federal prosecutors spent 3 months preparing comprehensive cases against all 15 individuals identified as participants in the illegal dumping conspiracy. Rodriguez worked closely with FBI Special Agent Walsh and federal environmental investigators to document the full scope of the criminal enterprise and its impact on public lands throughout the western United States. The prosecution team, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Reynolds, faced the challenge of presenting a complex case involving environmental crimes, corruption, conspiracy, and murder to a federal grand jury. The evidence included thousands of documents, financial records, forensic analysis, and testimony from cooperating witnesses. This case represents one of the largest environmental crime conspiracies ever prosecuted in the United States, Reynolds explained during a press conference announcing the indictments. The defendants systematically exploited their positions within the national park system to conduct illegal activities that contaminated public lands and resulted in the murder of an environmental researcher. The grand jury returned indictments against all 15 defendants on charges including conspiracy, environmental crimes, obstruction of justice, murder, and racketeering. The lead defendants, Patterson, Webb, Hendricks, Garrett, and Lisa Chen, faced potential life sentences if convicted on all counts. Rodriguez testified before the grand jury about her investigation into David Chen's disappearance and the discovery of evidence that led to exposing the broader conspiracy. Her detailed documentation and methodical investigative approach provided the foundation for the prosecution's case. Detective Rodriguez's thorough investigation was crucial to uncovering this conspiracy, Reynolds said. Her refusal to accept the original missing person case as unsolved led to the discovery of criminal activities that had operated for years without detection. The trial preparations revealed additional details about the extent of the illegal dumping operations and their environmental impact. Federal environmental investigators had identified contamination at over 60 dumping sites across California, Nevada, Utah, and Arizona, with cleanup costs estimated at over $100 million. Dr. Jennifer Walsh from the Environmental Protection Agency testified about the environmental damage caused by the illegal dumping operations. The defendants dumped industrial waste, toxic chemicals, and hazardous materials at dozens of locations throughout some of our most pristine desert ecosystems, she explained. The environmental impact will take decades to fully remediate. Rebecca Chen followed the legal proceedings closely, attending court hearings and meeting regularly with prosecutors to understand the progress of the case. She had become an advocate for environmental protection and oversight of activities on public lands, speaking at conferences and supporting legislative reforms. David died because he was trying to protect the desert environment he loved, Rebecca said during a victim impact statement. The people who killed him were systematically destroying the very ecosystems David dedicated his life to studying and preserving. As the trial date approached, several defendants began negotiating plea agreements in exchange for cooperation with prosecutors. Marcus Webb, Thomas Garrett, and Lisa Chen all agreed to plead guilty to conspiracy and environmental crimes charges in exchange for providing testimony against the other defendants. The cooperating witnesses provide us with insider knowledge of how the conspiracy operated, Reynolds explained to Rodriguez. Their testimony will be crucial for proving the full scope of the criminal enterprise and ensuring that all participants are held accountable. Bill Patterson, the former ranger who had killed David Chen, initially refused to negotiate a plea agreement and insisted on proceeding to trial. But as the evidence against him mounted and his legal situation became increasingly hopeless, he eventually agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for cooperating with the investigation of other environmental crimes. During Patterson's detailed debriefing sessions, he provided information about illegal activities that extended beyond the waste dumping operations. The conspiracy had also involved illegal hunting, artifact trafficking, and drug smuggling, using national park lands as cover for various criminal enterprises. Patterson's information has opened up entirely new lines of investigation, Walsh told Rodriguez. The illegal dumping was just one aspect of a much larger pattern of criminal exploitation of public lands. The most significant trial was that of Robert Hendricks, the former park superintendent, who had been the architect of the illegal dumping conspiracy. Hendricks maintained his innocence and claimed that any illegal activities had been conducted by subordinate employees without his knowledge or authorization. Rodriguez testified extensively during Hendricks' trial, describing how her investigation had revealed the systematic nature of the conspiracy and Hendricks' central role in coordinating illegal activities. The prosecution presented financial evidence showing that Hendricks had received over $2 million in payments from the illegal dumping operations. Hendricks used his position as park superintendent to identify dumping sites, coordinate with waste disposal companies, and cover up illegal activities, Rodriguez testified. He was not a passive supervisor who was unaware of what was happening. He was the central figure who made the entire conspiracy possible. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning guilty verdicts on all counts against Hendricks. He was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution of over $20 million to cover environmental cleanup costs. Patterson was sentenced to 25 years in prison for second-degree murder and conspiracy charges. Webb, Garrett, and Lisa Chen received sentences ranging from 10 to 15 years, based on their level of cooperation with prosecutors. The remaining defendants received various sentences depending on their roles in the conspiracy and their willingness to cooperate with ongoing investigations. All defendants were ordered to pay restitution to cover environmental remediation costs and damages to public lands. Rodriguez attended the sentencing hearings for all the major defendants, finding satisfaction in seeing justice served for David Chen's murder and the environmental crimes that had motivated his killing. The comprehensive prosecution had ensured that all aspects of the conspiracy were addressed and that similar crimes would be deterred in the future. The federal investigation continued even after the trials concluded, as prosecutors worked to identify and prosecute the companies that had paid for illegal waste disposal services. Over 40 companies eventually faced civil and criminal penalties, totaling over $300 million. Environmental remediation efforts began at contaminated dumping sites throughout the western United States, using funds recovered from the defendants and the companies that had participated in illegal waste disposal. The cleanup process was expected to take over 10 years and cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Rodriguez was commended by federal authorities for her role in exposing the conspiracy and ensuring that David Chen's murder was solved. She received recognition from environmental organizations and law enforcement agencies for her thorough investigative work and dedication to seeking justice. The David Chen case became a landmark prosecution that led to significant reforms in oversight of activities on public lands. New regulations and monitoring systems were implemented to prevent similar criminal enterprises from operating within the national park system. Rebecca Chen used the resolution of her brother's case as motivation to continue advocating for environmental protection and proper oversight of public lands. She established a scholarship fund in David's memory to support environmental science students and worked with congressional representatives to strengthen environmental crime prosecution. The full truth about David Chen's murder and the conspiracy that led to his death had finally been revealed through comprehensive investigation and prosecution. The case demonstrated the importance of environmental protection and the need for vigilance in preventing criminal exploitation of public resources. 6 months after the final sentencing in the David Chen conspiracy case, Rebecca Chen organized a memorial service at UC Berkeley to honor her brother's life and legacy. The service was held in the university's botanical garden, surrounded by the desert plants and ecosystems that David had dedicated his life to studying and protecting. Over 200 people attended the memorial, including David's former professors and classmates, environmental researchers, Park Service employees, and the law enforcement officers who had worked to solve his murder. Detective Rodriguez delivered remarks about David's unwitting role in exposing one of the largest environmental crime conspiracies in American history. David Chen died because he refused to ignore environmental crimes that he witnessed during his research, Rodriguez told the gathering. His commitment to protecting desert ecosystems ultimately led to the exposure of illegal activities that had contaminated thousands of acres of public lands. Rebecca had worked with UC Berkeley to establish the David Chen Environmental Protection Scholarship, which would provide funding for graduate students conducting research on environmental crimes and ecosystem protection. The scholarship would ensure that David's commitment to environmental science would inspire future generations of researchers. Elena Vasquez, David's girlfriend from his graduate school years, traveled from Colorado to attend the memorial service. She had remained in contact with Rebecca throughout the investigation and trial proceedings, finding closure in the resolution of David's case. David would be pleased that his death led to protecting the desert lands he loved so much, Elena said during her remarks. He always said that environmental science was meaningless unless it led to real-world conservation, and protection of natural resources. Dr. Patricia Williams, the former chief ranger at Joshua Tree National Park, attended the memorial service to represent the Park Service and acknowledged the institutional failures that had allowed the conspiracy to operate for years without detection. The Park Service has implemented new oversight procedures and monitoring systems to prevent similar criminal activities from occurring on public lands, Williams explained. David Chen's death was a tragedy that has led to important reforms in how we protect our natural resources. Federal environmental investigators provided updates on the ongoing cleanup efforts at contaminated dumping sites throughout the western United States. Over 60 sites had been identified and prioritized for remediation using funds recovered from the criminal defendants and participating companies. The environmental damage caused by this conspiracy will take decades to fully address, explained EPA Administrator Dr. Michael Thompson. But the prosecution of this case has sent a clear message that environmental crimes will be investigated thoroughly and prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Rodriguez had continued her work on environmental crime cases following the resolution of the David Chen investigation. She had been promoted to detective sergeant and assigned to lead a specialized unit focused on crimes involving public lands and natural resources. The David Chen case taught me that environmental crimes often involve complex conspiracies that require extensive investigation and interagency cooperation, Rodriguez explained during a law enforcement conference presentation. These cases can take years to fully develop, but they're crucial for protecting our natural heritage. The memorial service concluded with the dedication of a desert garden at UC Berkeley, featuring plants native to the Joshua Tree region, where David had conducted his final research. The garden included informational displays about desert ecology and the importance of protecting fragile desert ecosystems from human impacts. Rebecca had used the settlement funds from civil lawsuits against the companies involved in illegal waste disposal to support environmental protection organizations and research institutions. She had become a prominent advocate for stronger environmental crime prosecution and oversight of activities on public lands. David's death was senseless and tragic, Rebecca said during her closing remarks at the memorial service. But if his death leads to better protection of the environments he loved and prevents other environmental researchers from facing similar dangers, then something positive will have come from our family's tragedy. The Joshua Tree National Park had implemented new procedures for monitoring research activities and ensuring the safety of scientists and graduate students conducting fieldwork in remote areas. The Park Service had also improved communication systems and emergency response capabilities to prevent future tragedies. Jake Morrison, the photographer who had discovered David's equipment and initiated the investigation, attended the memorial service and spoke about the importance of citizen reporting in solving cold cases and exposing criminal activities. If I hadn't reported the evidence I found, David's murder might never have been solved, and the environmental conspiracy might have continued operating, Morrison said. This case shows how important it is for citizens to report suspicious activities and cooperate with law enforcement investigations. The federal task force that had investigated the conspiracy continued to work on related cases involving environmental crimes and public lands. The David Chen investigation had generated leads that resulted in additional prosecutions and the recovery of millions of dollars in damages from companies involved in illegal waste disposal. Rodriguez maintained contact with Rebecca Chen and other family members, providing updates on ongoing investigations and supporting their advocacy efforts for environmental protection and law enforcement reforms. 2 years after David's murder was solved, Rebecca published a book about her brother's life and the investigation that followed his death, Desert Justice. A Brother's Legacy became a bestseller and raised awareness about environmental crimes and the challenges facing researchers who work to protect natural resources. The book described David's passion for desert ecology, his meticulous research methods, and his commitment to environmental protection that ultimately cost him his life. It also documented the extensive investigation and prosecution that brought his killers to justice and exposed the broader conspiracy. Rebecca donated the proceeds from her book to environmental organizations and law enforcement training programs focused on investigating environmental crimes. She continued to speak at conferences and universities about the importance of protecting both natural resources and the researchers who study them. The David Chen case had become a landmark in environmental crime prosecution, cited in legal textbooks and training programs as an example of how thorough investigation and interagency cooperation can expose complex criminal conspiracies operating on public lands. Rodriguez often reflected on the case and its impact on her career and approach to law enforcement. The investigation had taught her the importance of persistence in cold cases and the value of following evidence wherever it might lead, even when it reveals uncomfortable truths about institutional corruption. David Chen was just trying to do his research and protect the desert environment, Rodriguez said during a retirement ceremony 5 years later. His murder was solved because we refuse to accept that good people sometimes just disappear without explanation. Every victim deserves that level of commitment from law enforcement. The Memorial Garden at UC Berkeley continued to serve as a reminder of David Chen's commitment to environmental science and the tragic circumstances of his death. Students and researchers regularly visited the garden for inspiration and reflection on their own roles in protecting natural resources. Environmental monitoring at former illegal dumping sites showed gradual improvement as remediation efforts continued. The desert ecosystems that David had studied were slowly recovering from the contamination caused by years of illegal waste disposal. The legacy of David Chen's life and death continued to influence environmental protection efforts and law enforcement approaches to investigating crimes on public lands. His commitment to scientific integrity and environmental protection had ultimately led to one of the most significant environmental crime prosecutions in American history. Rebecca Chen concluded her advocacy efforts by establishing a permanent foundation dedicated to supporting environmental crime investigation and prosecution. The David Chen Foundation provided grants to law enforcement agencies and training for officers specializing in environmental crimes. David's death showed us that environmental protection is not just about preserving natural beauty, Rebecca said during the Foundation's inaugural event. It's about protecting the dedicated researchers and activists who risk their lives to expose crimes against our natural heritage. We owe them our support and protection. The David Chen case remained active in the files of multiple federal agencies as investigators continued to pursue related environmental crimes and monitor compliance with environmental regulations. The comprehensive investigation and prosecution had created a lasting impact on environmental law enforcement that would benefit future generations of researchers and conservationists.